George Smith Patton Jr. was a name that inspired fear throughout Nazi Germany. The general who had driven his Third Army across Europe with relentless speed and force was dead at the age of just 60. Officially, his death was attributed to a tragic automobile accident followed by medical complications. Yet in the years that followed, rumors of something far darker began to emerge. Was the death of America's most celebrated general truly the result of an ordinary traffic accident, or was he eliminated by those who considered his outspoken views too dangerous to ignore? Today, we delve into one of the most enduring mysteries of World War II. By examining the known facts and exploring the many theories surrounding his demise, we attempt to separate reality from speculation in the strange case of General George S. Patton's death. To understand why conspiracy theories have persisted for nearly 80 years, it is essential first to understand who Patton was and why his life and actions mattered so profoundly. George Smith Patton Jr. was born in 1885 into a family with a long and proud military tradition. From a young age, he was consumed by dreams of battlefield glory, pursuing them with a determination that would shape his entire life. After briefly attending the Virginia Military Institute, he transferred to West Point, graduating in 1909. Even then, Patton distinguished himself not only through his military skill, but through an unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. During World War I, Patton served as a tank commander in the newly established armored forces. He was wounded during the Meuse-Argonne offensive but recovered and continued his career through the interwar years. By the outbreak of World War II, Patton had spent decades studying warfare, especially the fast-moving, mechanized style of combat that would come to define the conflict. When the United States entered the war, Patton was fully prepared. He first led American troops in combat during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa in November 1942. His success there earned him command of the 7th Army for the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. However, it was his leadership of the Third Army, beginning in August 1944 and lasting through the war's end, that secured his legendary reputation. Under Patton's command, the Third Army surged across France at astonishing speed. His armored forces penetrated deep behind enemy lines, exploiting breakthroughs, surrounding German units, and maintaining an aggressive momentum that the enemy struggled to counter. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Patton accomplished what many believed impossible, rapidly turning his entire army 90 degrees north to relieve the surrounded town of Bastogne. The maneuver stood as a masterclass in logistics, coordination, and leadership. By the conclusion of the war, Patton's Third Army had advanced farther and faster than any other Allied force in the European theater. They captured more than 750,000 enemy soldiers and inflicted massive losses on German forces. Patton himself became a global icon. His pearl-handled revolvers, ivory-hilted saber, gleaming helmet, and polished riding boots became enduring symbols of American military power. Yet Patton was as controversial as he was brilliant. His leadership style bordered on reckless aggression. His language was coarse even by military standards, and his blunt, public opinions frequently angered both his superiors and the press. Despite his success on the battlefield, Patton was a constant public relations liability. Time after time, his behavior sparked scandals that threatened to derail his career and embarrass the Allied command. The first major controversy erupted in June 1943, shortly before the invasion of Sicily. During a speech to his troops, Patton issued an illegal command with devastating consequences, telling his men to take no prisoners. Whether this was meant literally or simply as harsh motivational rhetoric remains debated, but the outcome was undeniable. After the capture of the Biscari airfield, American troops executed 73 Italian prisoners of war. 2 soldiers were court-martialed for these crimes, but Patton's order had placed Allied leadership in an impossible position. America's most famous general appeared to have sanctioned murder. To protect both Patton's reputation and the image of the U.S. Army, General Omar Bradley quietly ordered the investigation into Patton's responsibility to be dropped. Though the incident was buried, it marked yet another serious lapse in Patton's judgment. Only weeks later, Patton became embroiled in the incident that nearly destroyed his career, the infamous slapping episodes. On August 3, 1943, he visited an evacuation hospital in Sicily, where he encountered a soldier suffering from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, then referred to as combat fatigue or shell shock. Viewing the condition as cowardice, Patton struck the soldier across the face. A few days later, Patton repeated the act at another hospital. When a private explained that he was hospitalized due to combat fatigue, Patton erupted in fury. He branded the man a coward and a disgrace, shouting that he should be lined up against a wall and shot, before slapping him as well. When news of these incidents reached the press, public outrage followed swiftly. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, was compelled to formally reprimand Patton and order him to apologize to the soldiers involved, the medical staff, and every division within the 7th Army. For a time, it appeared that Patton's career was finished. He was removed from active command, excluded from the D-Day landings, and used instead as part of a deception plan to mislead German intelligence about the invasion. In August 1944, Patton was finally returned to command of the Third Army, and over the months that followed, he once again proved his value on the battlefield time and time again. The controversies surrounding Patton did not end there. In March 1945, with victory in Europe seemingly within reach, he authorized what later became known as Task Force Bomb, a daring raid far behind enemy lines aimed at freeing a prisoner of war camp at Heidelberg. The operation proved catastrophic. Of the 3-4 men who departed with 16 Sherman tanks and numerous other vehicles, only 35 made it back. The rest were either killed or captured, and every vehicle and tank involved in the mission was lost. The fallout from the mission made the situation even worse. It was soon revealed that Patton's son-in-law, Colonel John Waters, was being held as a prisoner at the camp. This led to accusations that Patton had approved a hastily planned, extremely dangerous operation to rescue a family member, showing little concern for the loss of American lives or equipment. Many viewed it as a clear abuse of power. Only the exceptional performance of Patton's Third Army during the final advance into Germany prevented the incident from destroying his career outright. When Germany formally surrendered on May 8, 1945, Patton fully expected to be reassigned to the Pacific Theater to lead an army in the final campaign against Japan. Given his reputation as America's most famous general and his unmatched combat record, such a move seemed logical. However, the reassignment never happened. Instead, after a short visit home to Massachusetts in June 1945, where he addressed enormous crowds, including 20,000 people at an outdoor event in Boston, Patton was sent back to Germany. There, he was appointed military governor of Bavaria, responsible for overseeing the occupation and the denazification of the region. The role was ill-suited to Patton. A commander accustomed to constant action, he found the largely administrative position dull and frustrating. Even more problematic were his views on post-war Germany, which clashed sharply with official U.S. policy and the opinions of his superiors. Patton regarded the denazification effort, the removal of Nazi party members from influential positions and the re-education of the German population, as misguided and largely irrelevant. To him, the true danger facing Europe was not a defeated Germany, but the growing power of the Soviet Union. As the early Cold War began to take shape, Patton became increasingly outspoken about what he perceived as the Soviet threat. He deeply resented the requirement to hand over territories liberated by his Third Army to Soviet control, as agreed upon by the Allied leadership. "We have had a victory over the Germans and disarmed them," Patton declared. "But we have failed in the liberation of Europe. We have lost the war." His attitude toward the defeated Germans created further controversy. Patton infamously remarked that membership in the SS meant no more in Germany than being a Democrat did in America. When this statement became public, it sparked another media uproar. Many were outraged that the military governor of Bavaria would compare a brutal organization responsible for horrific war crimes to a mainstream American political party. Patton also opposed the postwar plan proposed by U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr., which aimed to dismantle Germany's industrial base and turn the country into a primarily agricultural society. He believed such punishment would be disastrous, driving the German population toward communism and into the sphere of Soviet influence. In late July 1945, Patton toured the ruins of Berlin, an experience that deeply affected him. "Berlin gave me the blues," he wrote. "We have destroyed what could have been a good race, and we are about to replace them with Mongolian savages, and all Europe will be communist." It is important to note that Patton's views on race and his comments about various ethnic groups would be considered highly offensive today. He frequently made remarks that bordered on or crossed into anti-Semitism, further alienating sections of the American press and public. By the end of 1945, Patton had become a serious liability. Media opinion had largely turned against him, and President Harry Truman held him in low regard, comparing him unfavorably to egotistical figures such as General Douglas MacArthur and even to General George Armstrong Custer, who was killed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. Although Eisenhower respected Patton's military talent, he was worn down by the endless controversies. In October 1945, Eisenhower removed Patton from his post as military governor and reassigned him to command the 15th Army, a largely symbolic unit tasked with documenting the history of the war. Patton accepted the assignment, relieved to be free of denazification duties, yet he continued to openly criticize U.S. policy toward both Germany and the Soviet Union. What has drawn particular attention in the years since is what later came to light about General Patton's surveillance. Both American and Soviet intelligence agencies were monitoring his phone calls, a reflection of how deeply concerned they were about his behavior and his outspoken opinions. This led conspiracy theorists to ask an unavoidable question: were those concerns serious enough that someone might have wanted him permanently silenced? December 9, 1945 began like any other day for General George S. Patton. His chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, had invited him on a pheasant hunting excursion near the town of Mannheim. It was a cold, snowy Sunday, but Patton relished outdoor activity regardless of the weather. The hunting group traveled in 2 vehicles. Patton rode in his 1938 Cadillac Model 75 staff car, an imposing automobile suited to a general of his stature. The car was driven by Private First Class Horace Woodring, a 19-year-old combat veteran who had served as Patton's driver before. Major General Gay sat beside Patton in the back seat. Leading the way was a jeep driven by Sergeant Joseph Scruce, carrying the rifles, provisions, and a hunting dog. Leaving Patton's headquarters, the group set off toward the hunting grounds. During the drive, Patton requested a stop at the Roman ruins at Salzburg, reflecting his lifelong fascination with military history and historical landmarks. After exploring the site, the party resumed their journey. At first, Patton chose to sit in the front passenger seat to warm his feet near the heater. However, when they stopped at a military police checkpoint to move the hunting dog from the jeep into the Cadillac due to the bitter cold, Patton returned to his usual position in the right rear seat. General Gay sat to his left. With the jeep once again in the lead, the Cadillac followed along the N38 road toward the northern edge of Mannheim. At a railway crossing, the jeep passed through, but the Cadillac was forced to stop for a passing train, temporarily separating the 2 vehicles. Once the train cleared, Woodring continued driving forward. Roughly half a mile ahead, Woodring noticed 2 U.S. Army trucks parked along the roadside. As the Cadillac approached, one of the trucks, a 2.5-ton GMC 6x6, pulled out. In a matter of seconds, as it attempted to pass, the truck abruptly swerved left, directly into the Cadillac's path. There was no time for Woodring to react. The collision occurred at approximately 20 miles per hour. Though the crash was not particularly fast, its impact on Patton was devastating. He was thrown violently forward, striking a metal partition behind the driver's seat. The blow inflicted severe injuries to his head and neck, opening a deep gash that ran from the bridge of his nose to the top of his head. Patton slumped into General Gay's lap, conscious but unable to move. "My neck hurts," he said. "I think I'm paralyzed." Remarkably, both General Gay and Woodring escaped virtually unharmed, as did the truck's driver and passengers. Woodring immediately flagged down the first vehicle he encountered, which, by an extraordinary coincidence, turned out to be an Army ambulance. Sergeant Leroy Ogden, the attending medic, entered the Cadillac and was able to control Patton's bleeding. Patton was then carefully transported to the 130th Station Hospital at Heidelberg, arriving roughly an hour after the accident. Military police soon arrived at the crash site to conduct an investigation. The truck's driver was identified as Technical Sergeant Robert Thompson. His demeanor struck witnesses as unusual. He appeared indifferent to the accident and smiled constantly. Woodring suspected that Thompson and his 2 passengers may have been under the influence of alcohol. Adding to the mystery, Thompson was located nearly 50 miles from where he was officially assigned, seemingly engaged in an unauthorized joyride. Officers from the 808th Military Police Company interviewed everyone involved. Despite these irregularities, no charges were filed, and the incident was officially recorded as a minor traffic accident, a routine fender bender. At the hospital, doctors quickly realized the seriousness of Patton's condition. He was paralyzed from the neck down, with severe dislocation of the cervical vertebrae. The injury closely resembled what would now be described as a broken neck, with spinal cord damage that severed communication between his brain and the rest of his body. Specialists were urgently flown in from the United States, along with Patton's wife, Beatrice. Though fully conscious and mentally sharp, the general was trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed him. For a man whose life had been defined by movement, action, and physical bravery, this immobilization was a profound torment. For about a week, Patton's doctors closely monitored his condition. Then, unexpectedly, signs of improvement appeared. Some movement returned to his respiratory muscles, and cautious optimism began to grow. Plans were made to transport him back to the United States for extended treatment and rehabilitation. There was even hope that he might regain limited mobility. That hope was short-lived. On December 20th, 11 days after the crash, Patton's condition suddenly worsened. The following day, December 21st, 1945, he died. The official cause of death was pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure, both known complications of severe spinal injuries that disrupt the body's ability to regulate vital functions. On Christmas Eve of 1945, honoring his final wishes, George S. Patton was laid to rest among the fallen soldiers of his beloved Third Army at the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg. He remains there today, one headstone among thousands, a general who chose to lie beside the men he had led into battle. For nearly 30 years after his death, there was no serious suggestion of foul play. Patton's passing was accepted as a tragic accident that claimed the life of a legendary commander. That perception began to change in 1974, when British author Frederick Nolan published a novel titled The Algonquin Project. Though fictional, the book was loosely inspired by Patton's death and centered on a conspiracy to assassinate a prominent American general. The book was later turned into a 1978 film titled Brass Target. Although the movie was widely regarded as mediocre, both the book and the film helped spark public curiosity and imagination about the circumstances surrounding Patton's death. That curiosity intensified in 1979 when a former Office of Strategic Services operative named Douglas Bazeta stepped forward with an explosive allegation. At the time facing financial hardship, Bazeta claimed he had been ordered by OSS Director Major General William Donovan to assassinate General George S. Patton in December 1945. According to Bazeta, Patton had become an increasing embarrassment to the U.S. government due to his outspoken anti-Soviet views and harsh criticism of American policy in post-war Germany. Bazeta alleged that officials at the highest levels decided Patton needed to be permanently silenced and selected him to carry out the mission. On the surface, Bazeta appeared believable. He was a decorated war hero known for daring missions behind enemy lines during World War II. However, a closer examination of his claims reveals serious flaws. Bazeta asserted that earlier on the day of the accident, he had tampered with Patton's car by jamming a window open by 4 inches to create an opportunity for a clear shot. He claimed to have used a specialized weapon that fired small projectiles designed to resemble injuries caused by a car crash rather than gunfire. Bazeta said he shot Patton in the neck just before the staged collision, and when Patton survived both the shooting and the crash, he was allegedly poisoned in the hospital with a substance meant to imitate natural causes. These claims conflict sharply with established facts. The documented timeline and witness testimony directly contradict Bazeta's account. Patton was accompanied by several people, including General Gay and his driver, Woodring, for nearly the entire day. There was no opportunity for Bazeta to tamper with the vehicle or shoot Patton without being noticed. Medical evidence showed that Patton's injuries were entirely consistent with those expected from the accident that occurred. Furthermore, Bazeta was unable to provide even basic details about the weapon he claimed to have used, stating he could not remember where it was manufactured. Despite these inconsistencies, the media eagerly embraced the story. It had all the elements of a compelling narrative, a legendary general, Cold War intrigue, and an alleged assassination. Bazeta's claims were widely reported, often without rigorous scrutiny. Once the story gained public attention, it continued to spread and evolve. The conspiracy theory was further supported by what some viewed as suspicious circumstances surrounding Patton's death. One key point was that no autopsy was performed. Conspiracy theorists argued that this suggested a cover-up, reasoning that poisoning would have been discovered during an autopsy. In reality, Patton's death was considered the result of a straightforward accident with an obvious cause, leaving no justification for further examination. Another frequently cited detail is that certain records related to the accident were later found missing from the National Archives. While this has been portrayed as evidence of government suppression, a more ordinary explanation exists. Record-keeping during the final months of World War II and the immediate post-war period was often disorganized, and documents were sometimes lost or misfiled over time. These elements were later discussed in The Last Days of Patton, a 1981 book by Patton biographer Ladislas Farago. Since then, numerous books have expanded on the alleged assassination plot, some introducing new theories. One such theory suggests that Patton was killed not by American agents, but by the Soviet NKVD, the precursor to the KGB. According to this theory, Stalin's intelligence services viewed Patton as a dangerous figure who might someday lead American forces against the Soviet Union. His strong anti-Soviet rhetoric and his authority in occupied Germany supposedly made him a target. Proponents claim NKVD operatives either engineered the accident or ensured Patton's death while he was hospitalized. It is true that the Soviets closely monitored Patton. His communications were tapped, and Stalin's intelligence apparatus had a history of assassinations. However, there is no concrete evidence linking Soviet agents to Patton's death. When separating verified facts from speculation, several points are clear. Patton was a controversial and outspoken figure who had alienated many American and Allied leaders by late 1945. Both American and Soviet intelligence services were monitoring him. Patton ultimately died from injuries sustained in a car accident on December 9, 1945. There are also unresolved oddities, such as the behavior of the truck driver, Robert Thompson, who appeared disoriented and was found far from where he should have been after the crash. Still, there is no documentary evidence from U.S. or Soviet archives supporting an assassination plot. No credible first-hand testimony exists, and Bazada's account remains deeply inconsistent with known facts. There is no forensic evidence pointing to anything other than an accidental death, nor are there witnesses who observed anything suspicious beyond Thompson's unusual behavior, which could be attributed to shock, intoxication, or personal eccentricity. The strongest argument for conspiracy rests on circumstantial reasoning. Patton had become a political liability, and his death conveniently removed the problem. However, convenience does not equal proof, and inconvenient figures die in accidents without foul play every day. Conversely, the strongest argument against a conspiracy is the complexity such a plot would have required. Orchestrating an accident convincing enough to deceive witnesses, military investigators, and medical professionals, while ensuring Patton died and no one else was seriously harmed, would have demanded extraordinary precision. Maintaining silence among all participants for decades, despite repeated investigations, would have been even more unlikely. So why do conspiracy theories about Patton's death endure? Part of the answer lies in his larger-than-life reputation. Patton had survived years of intense combat, constantly exposed to danger and narrowly escaping death on numerous occasions. For many, it is difficult to accept that such a formidable figure could ultimately be brought down by a simple accident. For a man of such stature to die in an ordinary car accident during peacetime, only months after his greatest victories, feels strangely unsatisfying. It clashes with the heroic story we expect. When legendary figures meet unremarkable ends, we often struggle to accept it. Instead, we search for dramatic explanations because the ordinary feels inadequate. History offers many examples. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated by a lone gunman using a mail-order rifle, yet millions remain convinced a larger conspiracy was involved. Princess Diana lost her life in a car crash caused by reckless driving and the absence of seatbelts, but alternative theories continue to circulate. It is often more reassuring to believe that influential people die for profound reasons, brought down by powerful forces, rather than acknowledging that they are just as vulnerable to random misfortune as anyone else. Patton's own personality also fuels suspicion. He was a deeply controversial figure who had offended powerful individuals. Intelligence agencies kept him under observation, and there were people who may have welcomed his removal. While this suggests a possible motive, it does not provide proof that any action was taken. Fiction further shaped the conspiracy narrative. Early works such as Nolan's novel and the film Brass Target presented fictional scenarios showing how Patton could have been eliminated. Although openly fictional, these stories offered a framework later adopted by conspiracy theorists. Bazada's fabricated account then added what appeared to be a first-hand witness, lending false credibility to the theory. There is also a broader human tendency to distrust governments, especially in matters of secrecy and power. Given what we now know about covert operations, surveillance, and political assassinations, the idea that authorities might have removed a troublesome general does not seem far-fetched to some. Missing government documents only deepen this suspicion. So what is the final judgment? Was General George S. Patton murdered, or did he die as the result of a tragic accident? Based on all available evidence, the most logical conclusion is that his death was accidental, a series of unfortunate events that brought an abrupt end to the life of one of America's most renowned military leaders. The crash occurred in broad daylight and was witnessed by several people. Patton's injuries were fully consistent with the nature of the collision. He died 11 days later from complications commonly associated with severe spinal trauma. There is no medical or forensic evidence of poisoning or sabotage. Despite decades of scrutiny by historians, journalists, and conspiracy advocates, no credible proof of an assassination has ever surfaced. Could a conspiracy have existed in theory? Yes. Governments are known to conduct secret operations. Patton did have powerful enemies and was under surveillance. But the possibility of something happening is not the same as proof that it did. Extraordinary accusations demand extraordinary evidence, and in this case, such evidence is absent. The simplest explanation remains the most convincing. The truck driver, Robert Thompson, was taking an unauthorized drive and may have been intoxicated. He made a reckless turn directly into Patton's vehicle. A brief lapse in judgment led to irreversible consequences. Seated in the back, Patton was thrown forward into a metal partition, suffering a catastrophic spinal injury. He fought for nearly 2 weeks before dying from complications. It was a tragic and almost banal end for a legendary warrior, yet such endings are not uncommon in life. The general who commanded armies across Europe, survived countless battles, confronted German armor, and crossed rivers under enemy fire ultimately lost his life in a simple traffic accident. That contrast may explain why conspiracy theories endure. We want his death to carry the same weight and drama as his life, to feel purposeful and meaningful. But sometimes tragedy has no deeper meaning. Accidents happen, and even the greatest figures can fall to the most ordinary causes. Patton may have deserved a more fitting end, but the universe does not always deliver justice. In the absence of convincing evidence to the contrary, we must accept that one of history's greatest military minds was not taken by a shadowy plot, but by cruel chance. The story of Patton's assassination is compelling, but it remains just a story. The truth, as far as we can tell, is far simpler and far more tragic. On December 9, 1945, a careless turn by a truck driver brought an extraordinary life to an unremarkable end, and history lost one of its giants.